Yay! At the Apollo. No, that's different.
No, not the Apollo. Different planet.
Yes. All right. So we should be live. I've heard there's like a 10-second delay on YouTube for live things, so we'll see if that's actually true. I don't know, but we're just gonna launch into it.
Let's do it.
AC, yes. Welcome everybody. Happy October. Happy launch to scary season. Happy Scare-a-Thon 2021. We're doing the Friday Night Frights live streams. This is the first of 5. There are 5 Fridays in October, if you can believe it, and we're going to be here live every one of them at 7:30 p.m. Central, talking about various horror movies. Sometimes with just myself. I'm Ian Simmons of Kicking the Seat, and my lovely guest Aaron Christensen, Dr. AC of Horror 101 with Dr. AC. Sometimes we're going to have guest hosts and actual like guest commentators on to talk about these films. So what are we doing here? Like why the Friday Night Frights? Why the Scare-a-Thon? What is the Scare-a-Thon? Well, AC, is this year 10 or 11 for you?
This is the 11th iteration of Scare-a-Thon. Started back in 2010. Yeah, 2010. And we missed 1 year, but we have not missed a year since. And it has been a fantastic tradition I look forward to. And I'm happy to say that other people have come to look forward to it, including yourself, because you've been such a great supporter of it over the years. And I'm really excited for this year especially.
So essentially what you do is you watch, your goal is 31 movies or during the month of October to watch. And sometimes you do more, but you always try and hit that target of 31, and you raise money each year for a notable cause. So this year we're going to talk about, because before we hopped on, you mentioned that you'd already watched a movie today.
Yes.
I assume it's not one of the ones that we're talking about, right?
Yes. I mean, the Draculas and the Frankensteins, happily, those are ones that I've watched multiple times. So I was able to enjoy it in the background and know exactly what was happening. Part of the challenge for me this year is I decided, and I'll talk more about Albany Park Theater Project, which is this year's recipient of the Scare-a-Thon efforts. But they are notable for their diversity. And I thought, what'd be great kind of exemplification of diversity would be to watch a different horror movie from a different country of the 31. So it's going to be 31 horror movies from 31 different countries over the course of 31 days. Today was from France, and it was called Hostel from 2014.
So a different Hostel than
not Hostel, sorry, Hostile.
Oh, Hostile. Okay.
Yeah.
No. So, this brings something to mind I was going to ask you about, and I forgot. But Jason Kaufman, the wonderful Jason Kaufman, he put together a trailer for Scare-a-Thon for you this year, and I shared that out. I think yesterday, or no, it was probably this morning. Time means nothing. But I noticed that it was something about like 31 countries, and I was like, oh, wow, you're really doing that. So do you have it all mapped out, or are you just going to spin the globe each day?
I have selected, I have a preliminary list of countries and movies. If something, catches my eye, I had a couple of different options for France, but then this movie Hostile came along, and Nathan Ambrosio, I can't remember, he's got a lot of vowels, but he was 14 when he directed this movie, wrote, edited, directed this movie, and it's really good. It doesn't, there's no apologies. You don't need to say, well, it was directed by a 14-year-old, so give him a break. It's a legitimately good movie, and so I was intrigued by that. So I decided I would go with that instead of the other French offerings I had in the lineup. So it's going to be kind of like that. I have a lot of options, as you might guess, and I'm just kind of like following a path, but not strictly.
Wow. I think it's fascinating that there are 31 countries with horror movies. You think of them as primarily, just a few markets and places, but you're going to be doing some cool deep dives, I feel like. So that'll be exciting to follow along. Absolutely. And people can follow along with you at Horror 101 with Dr. AC. I've got that link down in the description below, so check that out. Also down there is an informational page, I think the landing page and the donation page for the Albany Park Theater Project. Right. So AC, tell us about this cause and why you got involved with them this year.
Absolutely, and I'm happy to talk more about that. I know we want to get to the movie, so hang in there, folks. Albany Park Theater Project is they're notable for a teen ensemble. All their performers are 14 to 18 years of age, and the ensemble helps create. I mean, they create the shows that are all original plays, and most of the ensemble are from lower income and or first generation Americans. So there's a lot of different cultural weight that they're bringing to all of these projects, and kind of opening people's eyes to experiences that they may not have been aware of, or just showing things through a different lens. And so in addition to that, they do a lot of immersive theater or site-specific theater, where it's not so much a proscenium where you sit in a seat and you watch a show. You actually travel with the cast through a building, and they will take you off. Certain actors will take you off to the side and have a conversation with you while the other audience goes off in another direction. And it's never the same show twice. And I just find that fascinating. It's a great example of what theater can be. But also the fact that it's being done by a youth ensemble where they're basically without a net. There's no adult there to cue them lines, off in the wings. They're on their own, and I've seen several of their shows, and it's extraordinary. So this year, I thought that it would be great to support them because they don't just do theater. They also help the students, the ensemble members, with college prep. They help them with tutoring. They take them on field trips they went to New York to explore what it was like to be in a major metropolitan city. I mean, there's just a lot of, other than Chicago, obviously. So yeah, there's a lot of opportunities. And in talking with the ensemble members, it's obvious that it's much more than just doing plays. Mm-hmm. It's an entire life experience.
Well, that sounds really cool. And at some point, I feel like I want to check this out and go see one of their performances. So your work is helping to support that. And also, viewers like you, if you feel so moved, you can go donate. I'm going to throw up the, let's see, banner right there. Yeah, no, I'm not going to throw up. Okay, we're not talking about The Exorcist tonight. We are going to be talking about the 90th anniversary of for me, the films that started them all, or at least that's what I've always kind of imagined. The Universal monster films, Dracula and Frankenstein, both came out in the same year. Both were, significantly impactful on the horror genre in terms of the pop cultural imagination, as well as, parodies and things like that. It's hard to watch Frankenstein without thinking of young Frankenstein. And I want to go back and just see how masterfully Mel Brooks captured the mood of a film that I hadn't seen until today. Mm-hmm. Yes, these are both first-time views for me. First, I want to welcome. We have a comment here. John Riskusic. I'm sorry, I'm butchering your name, but we're live here, so I'm not going to be able to go back and do another take. Good evening to you, John. Thank you for joining us and for hanging out. We'll hopefully make this a fun evening. And for everybody who is watching this, you can jump down into the chat and wish us a good evening or ask us questions, comments. Talk about your favorite horror movies. If you want to mention the first time that you've experienced these Universal monster movies, would love to hear about that too. We can talk about it. Before we dive into these Universal movies, I should mention that Aaron and I all year have been doing a series called Hammerland, where we've been looking at the Dracula and Frankenstein movies of Hammer Films. And we thought for October's Scare-a-Thon, it'd be cool to go back and see, what inspired the Hammer movies. And boy, I got to say, this has been an education watching these original films just to see what Hammer did from those, early roots. I know these movies had sequels and stuff like that, but just to see where they took the inspiration was surprising and a little bit upsetting, mostly when it comes to Frankenstein, which is a much goofier movie than I had imagined. But we'll talk about it. AC, tell me about your experience. Pick one, Frankenstein or Dracula. What are we talking about first?
Well, I don't know that I could tell you. In chronological order, Dracula did come out first, so probably that would be the logical starting point. I couldn't tell you which one I saw first. I feel like I've been aware of them as long as I knew there were movies, because my first love, as you probably know, is Godzilla, but they didn't play Godzilla every single creature features. So I showed up and there was Dracula, there was Frankenstein, there was the Wolfman. And that was kind of my intro to horror films, or as we knew them back then, monster movies. Because, horror films weren't really a thing, at least to my young brain. I was like, okay, there's monsters, there's vampires, and there's creatures created from, dead parts. And then there's wolfmen, there's mummies, and okay, got it. So that was my introduction to these films and many others like them, was via late night creature features or Saturday afternoon matinees on Channel 2 in San Francisco. And it was, I think because we, things were a little slower back then, it didn't bother me, the pace. I wondered how it would go down for a modern viewer such as yourself, or for a younger viewer. I'm always curious, like, how these black and white films sit with, today's youth. Do they enthrall the way that they enthralled me?
Well, I'm not that much younger than you, so I don't know if I count as today's youth. I'm certainly a newer viewer, and I've always had a love for black and white films. But I had heard, and I think we mentioned this during one of our previous discussions, that I knew some friends who had watched, I believe it was the original Dracula, possibly last year for a podcast, and they were not impressed. They thought it was, boring and terribly paced. And I think this is something that you had mentioned, is that it plays more like a play, like a stage play. And, I got to say, I kind of understand that, but it's much more exciting, much more, there's a lot more going on, a lot more cuts than I would have thought. I expected to just be watching a single shot and just people kind of coming in and off, set, but there's a lot more artistry to it. I mean, we'll talk about Dracula first, I guess, since I'm bringing it up, but Todd Browning, when did he do Freaks? Was that after Dracula?
Yes, that was 1932, but he had done.
Oh my God! Okay,
he had done quite a few silent films with Lon Chaney Sr. In fact, Lon Chaney Sr. was originally supposed to play Dracula, but he succumbed to cancer before he could play the role. And through a series of events, Bela Lugosi ended up taking the role. But we can talk more about that in a bit. But yes, Todd Browning already had quite a successful career going. And that's how he came to direct this film. He was Universal's first choice.
And, what a choice it was. I guess I want to approach this with, I feel like I've seen parts of both of these movies because, again, they're pop culture staples.
Sure.
But sitting down and watching them in context, I really understand why there are such iconic pictures. And there's a part of me that feels they're massively underappreciated because a lot of the derivative stuff that have come out over the last, 9 decades, very little of it seems to match up. Maybe it's a hard act to follow, but the establishing shot of Dracula in that sort of dirt floor of the castle, beneath his tomb, where the camera's just kind of panning in and you see his bride starting to wake up. It's, I wouldn't call it frightening, possibly because I was watching it on a TV at home, but I can imagine seeing this on a giant movie theater and just being intimidated by it. My first experience really with Bela Lugosi was with Martin Landau's Academy Award-winning performance in Ed Wood. And it was a great performance, but that was sort of Lugosi at the end of everything. This is him sort of at possibly the height of his powers. And I can't get a sense of what kind of an actor he was, but for what he needed to do in this movie, I thought he was pretty perfect.
Yeah, he had played the role on stage, and the idea of it playing like a stage piece is because that is what the film is being adapted from. The screenplay is adapted from the stage play by Hamilton Dean, and so that's why it does play like a play, is because that's its origins. But Lugosi had played the role on, I believe abroad and on Broadway, and but he was not the first choice. He was like, third or fourth choice because they were looking for somebody who was a draw, and he was an unknown. I mean, this basically catapulted him to stardom, and he became, a marquee name for the remainder of his life. But he was an unknown and not anybody's. It was a big gamble to put him in the role.
Well, what a payoff to that gamble. I will say, John pops in with another comment here. Love the use of sets in the Spanish Universal Dracula. Wider shots showcase the amazing castle that is generally cropped out in the Bela Lugosi version. I've not seen. Probably, of course, is not going to surprise anyone. I haven't seen the Spanish version. I do have it because I've got that Universal box set. I don't know if you can see it through the lights, but they put out this great set where they've got all of the monster movies associated with each of the creatures. But I definitely got to check out that version. Now, I will say, the castle. That's a great place to kind of kick things off in terms of the difference between the Universal and then, like, say, the Hammer versions.
Mm-hmm.
I've not read Bram Stoker's Dracula. At least I think I've seen the stage play like in high school or something, but the idea of, and I was familiar with Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula, so that as a road marker kind of threw me for a loop in a number of instances narratively. For example, the Castle Dracula is decrepit, it's run down. I'm used to seeing it as more of this posh kind of put together place, like especially in Hammer, we've got all that beautiful color and everything. But this really looked grimy and dingy, and the contrast between darkness and light in this film, and also in Frankenstein, frankly, is very chiaroscuro. Harsh lights, harsh blacks. It's kind of hard to see things in the shots where Dracula, Bela Lugosi, is using his vampire stare, and the shaft of light cuts across his eyes. You almost can't see anything else. It's very hypnotic and cool to look at. But yeah, what did you make of the atmospherics? Like, not necessarily the first time you saw it, but does it still hold up today? Does it give you the chills?
Well, I think it does. I think it is, and I agree. I think it is. I think it's easy. It's an easy comment to say that Dracula is slow and boring, and but I agree. I think there's so much atmosphere. You talked about it maybe not being frightening, but I think it's very rich in atmosphere, and especially in those early castle scenes. I think when people take issue with it is when it literally becomes a drawing room drama, because a lot of the stuff when the action moves to London, a lot of it is taking place in setting rooms and bedrooms and things like that. So it's a little more mundane. But those opening scenes with Jonathan, or rather Renfield, visiting the castle, I just think are extraordinary. And his, could you ask for a better entrance from a star than Bela Lugosi's, descending those stairs?
Yeah, and then listen to them, the Children of the Night. Just you did a little bit of a Freudian slip there when you mentioned Jonathan.
Right.
That's another point of diversion for me that I was kind of shocked at. And in my notes, it's funny because I had to scratch his name out when I realized who that character really was. Right. Because in the Francis Ford Coppola version, that aside from the fact that it's Keanu Reeves, it is Jonathan Harker who goes to Castle Dracula initially for that encounter. It is sort of beset upon by the brides. In this case, it's Renfield, played by, I think, the MVP of this movie. There's two of them. And I'm sorry to say Bela Lugosi is not the second one. I'd say he's the third. He's got a great presence. But in terms of the standouts, it's Dwight Fry as Renfield and Edward Van Sloan as Van Helsing. Oh my God. Talk about discoveries. And both of them show up in the other movie we're going to talk about tonight.
They do. Yep.
But it's such a great transformation between a guy who might as well be Jonathan Harker. He's kind of like the buttoned up guy who's there to provide, I think, legal papers because Dracula's, getting passage to London. And then he gets attacked by these vampires. And the next time we see him, he is the human, slave, the familiar of Dracula, and he's gone completely insane. And I also love the fact that when this vessel shows up on the, in London, it's basically, it's kind of like Aliens, where the craft is just kind of discovered floating and everybody on board is dead except for this one guy, and they have to figure out what's going on. And he gets committed to the Seward Sanitarium. It's just wonderful. And I understand that's a context that I'm bringing to it that people back in 31 wouldn't have had because of that lovely, switcheroo in pop culture. But it's it was just kind of a neat little surprise.
Yeah, and I mean, now audiences had seen something of it in the form of Nosferatu, which had come out in 1922, which is basically the story of Dracula, just thinly disguised to escape, prosecution by Bram Stoker's widow, which it didn't fool anybody, and legal action was brought against the film, and it was pulled from theaters, and we're lucky it survives today because some enterprising folks squirreled away a few copies. But I think the sea voyage in Nosferatu is definitely a standout, and it's one of the things I do miss a little bit about this adaptation.
I haven't seen. I saw Nosferatu of all things before I saw the original Dracula, and man, that turns 100 next year. That's bonkers. We'll have to talk about that. But so when they get to London, Renfield is committed, but Dracula is he's able to take up residence in the house or the abbey. Now I forgot to look this up, but isn't an abbey a religious institution like an old? I always thought of like an abbey where monks live, but it's a place right next to the sanitarium, which, if it is a formerly religious building, that opens up all sorts of questions and or possibilities. But I like that it's this weird kind of there's a vampire living next door drama, sort of like Fright Night that we would see several decades later.
I mean, and you talked about Edward Van Sloan, and I think Dwight Fry is far and away he runs away with the movie. And I think some of the other criticism is that Dracula isn't actually in his own movie very much. Like he does take a fair amount of time off stage.
He does, and again, maybe this is just my prep with all the Hammer films we've been talking about, but I mean, God, we've talked about Christopher Lee Dracula movies where he has literally one line.
Right.
But he's still a presence, and it's not so much is Dracula in his own movie, it's what's going on around him. And like I mentioned, like we've discussed, Renfield is amazing, and the Van Helsing doctor is the guy's hair alone. I don't know what is going on there. It looks almost like plastic. It's so well put together, like that kind of crew cut or whatever.
Well, and Van Sloan played the part on Broadway as well.
Well, okay. Let's take a quick moment. From Big Swifty 500, a couple of things. Dracula has no musical score. Look at a movie like Bride of Frankenstein, where the music is almost overwhelmingly beautiful. I'm a huge fan of musical scores, and I think that they make or break a film. That's a very interesting point, and I tend to agree with you, although it may be because I watched Dracula at 4:00 in the morning the other day, because that's the kind of life I live, that I didn't pick up on the lack of the lack of music. I was just so sucked up into what else was going on. Now I'm going to have to watch that and see if I'm distracted by a lack of musical distraction. Let's see. And I should also mention that before I saw Frankenstein, I had seen The Bride of Frankenstein. My movie watching habits make absolutely no sense. I'm fully willing to admit that. Let me ask about the Seward Sanitarium. Does it have the worst security since... Oh, I've lost Aaron. Oh, no. I think I'm still alive. And, yep. Well, let's see. Well, hopefully Aaron will be able to pop back in. Apologize for the technical difficulties, folks. And for those just joining us, yes, I've lost my co-host in midstream. But, well, while we wait to get Aaron back, if we have any questions or further comments, I'll be happy to address those. And I'll take a moment to just remind folks that for Scare-a-Thon 2021, thank you, John, for confirming that I'm still here. But for Scare-a-Thon 2021, Aaron is watching as many movies as he can during the month of October to benefit the Albany Park Theater Project, which, as he mentioned, is a theater group of 14 to 18-year-old kids who put on their own kind of imaginative plays. They come from a multitude of backgrounds and tell sort of impactful stories. And the way he describes it, it's completely sort of interactive theater and unlike anything he's ever experienced before. So definitely check them out. As you can see, the banner is scrolling down at the bottom, so you can go and support them there. I also have, because you shouldn't necessarily just throw money at something you don't know what it is, so I've also included a link to the Albany Park Theater Project website in the description of the live stream you are watching right now. So if you are so moved, please go ahead and donate. I should also mention that we've got another series of shows coming up this month. As I mentioned, there are 5 Fridays in October, and we're going to be here for all 5 of them. We're going to have some guest hosts from some of the other Kicking the Seat horror-themed series that you may know and love. We're also going to have some special guests to talk about different movies, and so that should be a lot of fun. We're kind of doing a version of Hammerland tonight because we have, for all year, as I mentioned, we've been talking about the Dracula and Frankenstein Hammer films, and now we're seeing kind of how they compare to the Universal ones. But we're also going to have, next week, we're going to be talking about The Killer Reserved 9 Seats, which is a Giallo film. Yes, we're going to be talking about doing a special session of Accademia Giallo, where we take a look at a different Italian horror film, Italian thriller, really, each month. So that should be a lot of fun. Yeah, so I guess, I'm vamping, which is appropriate because we're talking about Dracula right now. Not sure where Aaron went. It might have been an internet connection. Sometimes that happens in the world of live broadcasting. But no, so yeah, I should mention, again, this is the first time I've seen Dracula and Frankenstein. And, I guess I could just take a second to talk about, oh, wait a second. Hold on. We've got AC. There you are.
Well, that was fun.
Hey, what happened? As Fred Willard might say, or when he was alive.
The internet. Isn't it great?
No, I mean, it is in the fact that it allows us to talk to each other across
It does,
town, but
it's not great internet, and that's the problem. I was, as I was being frozen out, I was saying that Edward Van Sloan and Lugosi had appeared on stage together, so it was a very lived-in performance. I don't know what you've said since then.
I took a moment to, because I didn't want to continue on talking about the movies, particularly without you here. So
Right.
I just I talked a bit more about Albany Park Theater Project, and again, copping to the fact that I haven't seen these movies until now, and it's kind of weird. I was actually going to talk about, maybe we can segue into this.
How did you not watch these movies until now? Like, I think that's a question that deserves answering.
It's a great question. Part of it is, and we'll get to Frankenstein in a minute, because I think that is going to be more key to why I'm kind of glad that I didn't watch it before now. But it was just, these things are so ubiquitous that I feel like I've seen these movies already, because they pop up in like clip shows or parodies or a billion remakes that kind of tell the same story over and over again. It's like, and as much as I said I love black and white movies, and I do, there is kind of like this feeling like, I'm just going to sit down and watch this old movie. No, there's a million new things out that I can check out.
Right.
But it's great reason to go, these shows like this are my, one of the reasons I love doing it, is because it's an excuse to say, I'm going to sit down and experience this. Damn it. I'm getting too old to not have seen them.
Right. Well, and I think that's, I mean, it's, again, having seen it from several different stages of life, seeing it as a kid, and now, coming back to it and appreciating it really as an adult and a fan of cinema. It's not just, that thing that mom let me stay up to watch, because we didn't watch a lot of TV in our house, but for whatever reason, mom was okay with me watching monster movies. And so, yeah, I just think it's fascinating that, here it is celebrating its 90th anniversary, which begs the question, when it has its 100th anniversary, does it become public domain? I think that's something that people have been questioning for years, because, as we start to celebrate the 100 years of cinema, it's like we're coming around to various landmark films, and it's like, the 100 years is supposed to be the public domain factor, but I haven't heard of Phantom of the Opera suddenly becoming public domain.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that because it's not nearly as long, but in the last week or so, there have been a lot of news stories about how Disney and Marvel are running up against some copyright expirations on Spider-Man and Doctor Strange,
Mm,
and like I think the estates of Steve Ditko and Stan Lee are like suing Marvel, and Marvel's suing them back, and it's a whole big mess. But I mean, they've got enough leeway. That I'm sure that Universal can use its great, legal might and political influence to perhaps change the copyright laws
right, right.
or find some loophole around them. I mean, in some ways, I'm glad that these are in the hands of a major studio because they can do things. And that's not to say the independent house couldn't do something like the beautiful, restorations and preservations of these things, the ultra high definition, all that. Because that's one thing I was going to talk about before you came back on was watching these things on my, TV instead of, just watching it, on a big screen. I would love to see both of these, in like the music box theater or something, but also I don't know that watching this 90 years ago, if I would have been able to appreciate the richness of all of the detail of, I have a feeling some of it, maybe this is true of like the television presentations and not so much the big screen because that's film.
Right.
But the inky blacks of stuff, like I think I put up the trailers for both of these movies that I nabbed off of YouTube, and they're just so murky and fuzzy and washed out in places. Watching this on the Blu-ray, it's like just these beautiful gray tone digital paintings that happen to be moving and very much alive.
Well, and I feel like, I mean, when these movies played in their heyday, and again, when they were revived years and years and years, I mean, these films had people terrified. They were transfixed. They hadn't seen anything like this before. Universal was struggling. Universal was on the verge of bankruptcy when Dracula and Frankenstein came out, and basically just saved the studio. They were dubbed the Dark Twins because the success of Dracula led them to rush another monster movie into production, and that was Frankenstein. They were looking for another classic of literature, and they hit upon Frankenstein, and that came out later in the year, and the 1-2 punch of those carried the studio into the next decade and beyond.
2 points to that. One, speaking of Marvel, it's just amazing because now we think of Marvel, they've got these multi-billion-dollar properties out there, and they basically own theaters now. Back in the 90s, before they brought everything back into the Marvel and eventually the Disney house, they had all their properties scattered among other studios, and it was a giant mess, and they were on the verge of bankruptcy. And now look where they are. And then to think about where Universal has come almost first full circle. A few years ago, they did that Tom Cruise Mummy movie, and they were supposed to launch the Dark Universe.
Yep.
And the Mummy just kind of came and fizzled and tanked that whole thing. I never watched it, but I think didn't Russell Crowe show up as Mr. Hyde or something, and they were going to do a whole thing. And I know they did Benicio del Toro as the Wolfman of like 10 years ago.
Right.
So yeah, but I think just leave the Universal monster movies alone. I don't think the remakes are gonna capture what the original films could do. I just want to pause for another comment here. Yes, Big Swifty 500. Yes, OMG, the Kill Reserve 9 Seats is one of my favorite Giallo films. Excitement and question mark. I like that. But we'll be talking about that next week with John Kitley. So that'll be very exciting. But before you blipped out a little bit ago, I remembered I was going to say the Seward Sanitarium, does it have the worst security since Arkham Asylum? Because Renfield is just walking around. He keeps bursting into this parlor, and you've got the befuddled guards like, oh, there he goes again, and runs off to chase him with a butterfly net or something.
Yep. I mean, well, if you recall in The Hammer, when Thorley Walters is playing a very Renfield-like character, he manages to get out pretty easily as well. So maybe it's just, wherever you put Renfield, that's not the place to put him because he's just going to get out. Yeah,
I think it was interesting. He had some kind of a line where he was talking about bugs, like he didn't want to drink human blood, but he was very much into eating bugs. He was almost repulsed by the idea of eating eating people, which I understand. But yeah, so what else? I mean, I don't want to spend the entire night talking about Dracula, but
we could, and that's the truth, is that there's a lot to discuss. But yes, we have a double feature to cover.
I do want to say the one thing before we go, unless there's anything else that stands out about Dracula that you want to talk about, I want to talk about Dracula's demise. I understand why they were able to sequelize that story, because in my mind, Dracula didn't actually die in this movie. He gets killed off screen, man.
Yep.
What?
No, it was very disappointing, and it is usually one of the things that people bring up as kind of the lameness of Dracula, is that, you know, like, we don't even get to see a good staking. He dies off screen with kind of it's not a great climax, and I think everybody would agree with that. To John's point, I mean, like, the Spanish Dracula is decidedly more full-blooded, and the story is that they would shoot the Lugosi version on the sets during the day, and then at night the Spanish crew would come in and shoot on the same sets, basically shooting the same material. I think it certainly has its fans. I'm among them. I definitely like the Spanish Dracula, and I think that if you could do a little merging of the two, you'd have the perfect Dracula film.
Now, do you know any idea, theories, or maybe just knowledge why it was such a bloodless and indeed off-screen kill? Was that part of the play, or did they just not have Lugosi for that last scene, or what?
I mean, I think probably it was a let's dodge the censors type of thing. I don't know what I don't think the Hays Code was in effect yet. No, it wasn't, but they may have just been trying to keep things, on the straight and narrow.
Even just like a scene of, Van Helsing leaning over a coffin and going like this, I don't see Dracula at all. You can just hear him like scream or something, but anything's better than, Van Helsing pretty much shows him like, yep, I took care of him while you guys were getting ready to neck or whatever.
And it also could have been a remnant from the stage play, because I'm sure they didn't stake him on stage. And so they went, well, in the play, he walks off stage and stakes him and then comes back and says, all done.
Well, minor nitpicks aside, I thought this was, the perfect, introduction really to Dracula, even though I've seen all these, other different movies. Lugosi, I think he does have a good presence. It's weird because as much as I've loved the Van Helsing of Peter Cushing, yes, I love the Van Helsing here, but I still think Lugosi has more presence as Dracula in this than Christopher Lee does in pretty much any of the Hammer movies. Part of that could just be colored by our conversations, where I disappointingly found out that Christopher Lee, after a very certain point, was like, I don't want to do this anymore. And I just interpreting the heavy-eyed Dracula stare as just like boredom on his part.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, and I mean, and Lugosi was typecast as Dracula / a horror actor pretty much for the rest of his career. So Lee was wary, understandably so, of falling into the same trap.
Yeah.
But both films made their stars worldwide. They brought them worldwide acclaim. So, there's no denying that there's an appeal, but also a price.
I like that. That could be, that would be a great name for a book about Lugosi and Karloff and the price they paid for fame, the appeal and the price. Get on that.
And then
Coming in for 10%.
Do the forward for it. But it's all gone away now. No time for that.
No time to die either. Wait, that's James Bond. We're not talking about that tonight. We are going to talk about Frankenstein. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to say I think this is the lesser of the two films for me.
You're in the minority, but well done. Well spoken.
Now, am I the minority in this conversation? Well, we can't be in a minority in the conversation. There's only two of us.
I'm saying that the general prevailing wisdom would disagree with you.
Okay. where do you come down on Frankenstein? Just kind of general feeling about it.
I think it's an astonishing film.
Yes, I would agree. And the reason I have to take it down a few notches in my estimation. And again, it's the first time I saw it was today.
Sure.
So maybe on repeat viewings, I can get a bit more into the rhythms. But there's just this almost like a lesser Hammer Frankenstein goofiness that somehow traveled back in time to infect this movie. It has such a tremendously heavy presence that when the stuff that doesn't quite feel like it makes sense sneaks in, it threw me for a loop.
Okay.
And a lot of it, I think, has to do with Baron Frankenstein, who's Henry Frankenstein's father.
Yeah.
Who's sort of the baron of this German village. He's kind of like the mayor, or at least the wealthiest guy who lives there. He's brought in sort of as the comic relief, and the fact that he doesn't just have one scene, but he actually goes to Frankenstein's lab and brings the comedy with him and turns this whole scene into almost like a Three's Company like
the Burgermeisters who you're talking about, right?
I thought it was his father. Yeah, because his dad does go to the windmill lab to check up on his son. Right. And it's there that they encounter the monster. And there's this whole thing of the doctor and Frankenstein have tried to sedate the monster, and they actually do in fact succeed. But just as they're doing that, Dad shows up along with May and Victor. And there's this whole thing of like, well, we got to drag this, monster body away. And, what if my dad finds out? Weirdness that it turned into like a weird sitcom in the middle of this suspenseful ordeal.
Okay. I mean, I will grant you that some of the plot points might be a little shaky, as is often the way with the older films. But the presentation of it, the cinematography, the set design, the production design, the performances, I think it's I think it's a quantum leap, to be honest, beyond Dracula. It's a whole other realm of cinema by comparison.
And I will agree with you. However, if it had maintained, I think, the seriousness of Dracula throughout, right, I would have been able to completely go there with you, because it's not until like the Baron Frankenstein doesn't show up until after the halfway point of this movie.
Right.
And when he does, and particularly the coda at the very end, it's like he shows up and he does a toast to the son of the House of Frankenstein. Yep. And it's this very jovial scene where his son is barely clinging on to life in the room behind him, and all the kind of chambermaids crowd around him with this wine, and he's being all jolly and stuff. I'm like, what is this? If you had told me that was going to be the ending to the movie I'd started watching, an hour beforehand, I wouldn't have believed you.
Well, and to be fair, James Whale liked to have a little bit of comedy in his movies. If the comedy here bothers you, you're going to have a heck of a time with Bride of Frankenstein, because there are scenes in that are just full on, knee slapping, going for the joke.
Well, and that's the thing. I haven't watched Bride of Frankenstein in, it's probably been half a decade or more. But I remember that movie just being kind of weird at the outset and not as gothic horror-y as the original Frankenstein. And this again goes back to what I know of Frankenstein from the Hammer films. I like what they did with Peter Cushing's character in that series to make him more of a loner, more of a twisted, kind of a preppy kid who grew up, pushing science to the brink. We kind of get a sense for that here because, Henry Frankenstein does come from wealth, but we don't really know that until much later in the picture. He's just kind of like this. I don't know if the term college kid is appropriate because he's obviously a grown man, but he's got a fiance that unlike the Peter Cushing version, you could see him almost getting married because someone kind of like was like pestered him into it, and he was like, "Oh, fine." But in this movie, Henry and May are very much in love with each other, and she kind of, pulls him back from the brink,
Yep.
or at least she does, but it's too late because the monster is already, the genie is out of the bottle, as it were. But one thing that I had not picked up on from pop culture, the famous "it's alive" scene has been done everywhere, including, the movie Weird Science, which is probably the first time I encountered it. I did not realize, that Igor was not named Igor in the original. It was Fritz.
That's right. That's right.
Played once again by the lovely Dwight Fry from Dracula, playing another, off his rocker character. But also that in that lab, when they're bringing Frankenstein to life, that there was an audience. It wasn't just Igor and Frankenstein and the chain and the lightning and everything. May and Dr. Waldman, played by Dracula's Edward Van Sloan, and May's best friend, Victor, played by what's his name?
David Manners.
John Bowles.
Oh, sorry, John Bowles. Sorry, David Manners is in Dracula.
Okay, so John Bowles plays the boring best friend. There's a lot of those in these kinds of movies, like the male lead who's just there to be kind of dashing when it's appropriate, but to just not overshadow the true stars of the film. He does fine, I guess. But there's these people watching this experiment kind of in disbelief and horror, which adds this new element to it. And the goofiness, I think, first reared its head when Frankenstein has his "it's alive" moment. He's brought an assemblage of corpse parts that he's literally stitched together to life, not back from the dead. He specifically says this was never alive. So right. I'm not reanimating a corpse. But so he brings these people back to life. The audience is like, wow. And then it cuts to May and Victor sitting on the couch in Frankenstein's dad's place, the Baron, like in the drawing room, and they're just like, yeah, he's doing great. Like, no, that scene does not happen after you witness the animation, the unnatural creation of life via lightning. Like, I don't know what was missing from that scene, but can you explain this to me?
I can't explain it to you. It's funny how I've just kind of like accepted this because I've seen it so many times. Like, well, no, that's the next scene. So it doesn't bother me, and that might be familiarity breeding contempt. But I'm just kind of like, but what's the problem? It with regard to Cushing's portrayal versus Colin Clive's as the Frankenstein, honestly, I don't know why they changed his name from Victor to Henry, but they did. And it's one of those things like, I guess Henry's a more accessible name, and Henry is a more accessible doctor as well. I mean, he's certainly somebody who wouldn't mind being accepted in the village. He's not somebody who's trying to deliberately push people away. He's just really caught up in his work. He thinks he's on to something, and is excited to share it.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is I like the dimensionality of the mania. It's not like he went over the edge and never came back, like we saw with Cushing. As I mentioned before, May, his fiance, was able to kind of smack some sense into him. He's like, "You're right. This is crazy." At one point, and it's the scene I mentioned earlier, the kind of the weird Three's Company sitcom moment where the dad shows up as they're trying to dispose of the Frankenstein body, or the monster body. I'm sorry, I'm not going to make that mistake again. But Dr. Waldman is basically Henry Frankenstein passes out because he's been attacked by his own creation, and they are able to sedate the monster. And Waldman's like, "You go on, I'll take care of this, creature."
Right.
Cut back to the lab sometime later. Frankenstein is, still sedated, And you see Waldman's making notes in his journal. It's almost like he's been, monitoring him and running some additional experiments, because he's saying, like, he keeps getting stronger. He's getting more volatile. I keep having to increase the frequency of the injections to sedate him. So I don't know how much time has passed, but the monster comes to life, strangles Dr. Waldman to death, and then storms out. And then that eventually leads to his rampage where he kills the little girl by the lake. But my question is, we cut back to the Frankenstein estate, and Henry is on the mend. He's like out there in the plush, like lavish yard with like the shade and his beautiful fiance and a dog. And he's like, oh yeah, I don't know what I was thinking. Thank you so much for pulling me out of there. That was nuts. I'm so glad that's behind me. I'm like, this is not the Frankenstein I know. And I kind of like that, again, that dimensionality. But as brilliant a scientist as he is, he never thought to say, by the way, have you heard from Dr. Waldman since I got back? And I might want to drop him a letter or swing by his house to say, so you did dispose of the monster, right? Because way too much time passes for my
and I think in this incarnation, Frankenstein is deeply embarrassed and ashamed of what he's done, and basically just kind of like shuts the door on it, which is in keeping with the novel, and it's in keeping with the themes of the novel, in that he abandons his creation. He is an absent parent, and I think that's kind of the tragedy of it. And I think Whale does a terrific job of portraying the monster as an abandoned child, one that has not been given a moral code, has been basically shunned and sent out into the world to fend for itself. And so, it can't really be blamed. It is a true innocent, even if there are things that it does that, get it in trouble, such as, throwing little girls into lakes.
And I'm sorry, I knew from the lore and from pop culture that that the monster killed a little girl. I didn't know exactly how it happened. And at one time, it's a completely charming and disarming scene where she finds him in, stumbling around the woods, and she invites him down, to sit down with her by this lake. And she's tossing flowers, and she's like, look, I'm making boats. And these flower petals are floating on the water. And he's like, oh, he doesn't say it, but he's like, I'll make a boat too. And he picks her up and throws her. I'm like, oh my God. But she drowned.
They run out of flowers. So, what else can we throw in?
He's nothing if not improvisational. I'll give him that.
Yep.
But what I liked about this, I love more about this movie than I don't, like about it, just to be clear. I think it's a spectacular, film in a lot of regards. But one thing I did love is they make it a point to say that the brain that's inside the monster is that of a killer. And the Frankenstein monster ends up, killing a person, but it doesn't go on a homicidal rampage. That suspicious, superstitious townspeople take up torches and eventually burn, the windmill lab, which we got to talk about in a second, down to the ground, taking the creature, we think, with it. But it's not like it was an inevitable thing where the monster was going to come to life, and because there's this murderer's brain, it's going to start intentionally, killing people. That's what's part of the tragedy, because there's this idea that in a more nurturing environment where you didn't have, the Fritz Igor character whipping it in the dungeon and indeed having it be caught up, chained up in a cold dungeon, maybe it could have learned and, manifested some kind of humanity that we see come through with that little girl up until that horrible misunderstanding.
Right. And I think, it's the idea of it being a damaged brain, like we don't know anything about this killer, from whence it came. It could have been somebody who exhibited similar characteristics, that didn't know its own strength and accidentally murdered people. We just know that it's a killer. So that's a bit of a stretch. I actually hadn't thought about that before, but I think the idea is that had they gotten the brain that they'd intended, that this would have been a reasoning and articulate creature, which is what it ends up being in the book. It becomes educated and speaks in full sentences, and has actually, is is as educated as its creator by the time they face each other.
Now, I have not read the novel, and I think for next year I'm going to read both of those novels, the films that we're talking about. But you bring up an interesting point. I assume that you saw Frankenstein before you read Frankenstein. Is that fair?
That is for both Dracula and Frankenstein. I had seen the films before I read the source material.
Okay. Oh, hold on a second. We got a joker here. Miguel, yes, the brain belonged to AB Normal. Oh, love it. But okay, so what you mentioned there about Frankenstein, or the monster, the creature having intelligence and being able to reason, that sounds fascinating to me. Was it any indication as to, maybe outside of the fact they just wanted to have a scary movie, why didn't they go that? Why change that in the adaptation? And do you have any sense that people who may have read the book, when they saw the universal picture, were disappointed, or were they just caught up in the thrills?
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I've often commented on Frankenstein is not a very faithful adaptation of the novel. And it would be interesting, like we often hear all the Sturm und Drang, when a beloved book is made into a film and it deviates from the source material. This is a terrible adaptation of Mary Shelley's novel, but it's an amazing film. And so I think it's an interesting point to bring up whenever somebody says, well, it's not the book. It's like, and that's okay, maybe. I'm looking at the timestamp, and I just feel like we have to talk about Karloff.
Yeah, of course. The thing that made this movie iconic. Yeah.
Lugosi was actually approached to play the monster, and he would end up playing the monster in subsequent sequels, but he turned down. He's like he doesn't have any lines, and there's all this makeup, and I'm just not interested. And so they went looking for their replacement, and they came across Boris Karloff, who had been kind of laboring in obscurity, very similar to Christopher Lee, honestly. Had been laboring in like doing small parts here and there, and this was kind of his big break. James Whale said he saw him in the Universal Cantina and said, "That's my monster." And by the end of the year, Karloff was an international star.
I was wondering if when Whale said that, if Karloff heard it and said, "Well, screw you, pal."
I think Karloff was ready to do the job, because it was good to work.
Was he working in the canteen?
Yeah, no.
But no, I'm glad that you pulled me over to talk about the iconic creature, because there is something that you don't get from this knowing about Frankenstein from pop culture, which is the phenomenal performance that he gives, the wonderful makeup job. I mean, you think about how overdone creature design is nowadays in modern films. You go back to something like Frankenstein, it's just a guy in like regular black pants and a black shirt with a kind of a weird head and some stitching. And it's not so much terrifying, but just beautifully fascinating and kind of wrong. What struck me the most was when his hand, comes to life and it kind of slowly comes up. You can see the beautiful stitching from when the hand was grafted onto the arm, and it's not just kind of a simple like, oh, here's the perfect circular cut. It's right. Jagged, like he had to do some real work to get these things to meld together, and it's beautiful. And I gotta say, of the two movies, I like Dracula more overall as a film, but I love Karloff more as a performance over Lugosi's.
Yeah, and I think that by and large, Karloff became, certainly was more respected and worked in higher quality productions following their two breakout performances. Karloff enjoyed quite if you've seen Ed Wood, that like Karloff enjoyed a much better and more successful, richer career, more respected. like I think Lugosi, just as a handicap of his accent, and he struggled a little bit with English, and was just kind of typecast as a monster actor, and so it became a problem. Now, fun fact is that in Son of Frankenstein, which is the one that very much Young Frankenstein's plotline is borrowed from, the character of Igor is played by Bela Lugosi, and it's one of Lugosi's finest performances, and it absolutely deserves to be checked out. It's a terrific movie, and it's an amazing performance. And I would say Lugosi actually outacts Karloff in that film.
In Son of Frankenstein.
Son of Frankenstein, 1939.
That doesn't sound like it should be a good movie, but
no, it doesn't. And
I'm going to go on your recommendation again. For anyone who hasn't picked up the Universal, Blu-ray collection, I absolutely recommend it. And thanks again to John. I knew the name of the makeup artist in Frankenstein was on the tip of my tongue. He says Jack Pierce. So thank you very much for bringing that up. It's just a phenomenal performance, phenomenal production design and makeup. It is. I'm kind of coming around to your point of view on Frankenstein being the superior film. I just got to block the 3 minutes of goofiness out of the 100 or the hour and 10 minutes, and I'll be fine. But I think that this is as good a place as any to kind of wrap up, because we are just about an hour. But I do want to once again give a shout out to the Albany Park Theater Project, which is what we're raising money for during the entire Scare-a-Thon. I do want to mention, now, by the way, the donation link is scrolling across your screen right now. There's also a link you can actually click on in the description, so please check them out. I do want to mention that folks can follow along with Aaron's entire 31-day horror movie journey with these kind of daily blog posts over at Horror 101 with Dr. AC. .blogspot.com, is that right?
If you look up Horror 101 with Dr. AC, you'll find it.
Yeah. Oh, hold on a second. Yes, John, I contrast that goofiness to the bat puppets in the Lugosi Dracula. I blocked those out. Thank you for keeping me honest, because when the bats show up, I'm like, that reminded me of every parody of the bad vampire movies that you'd see, including in Fright Night. Oh my gosh. So yeah, you got me on that one. Okay. I'll take one bat over a bad Baron Frankenstein any day, maybe. But so anything to close this out, AC? Any final thoughts I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled that you took the opportunity to, because I think, like you, I think I don't revisit these films often enough because I feel like I've seen them. They are part of our makeup, part of our fabric at this point, and to actually sit down and experience it, from beginning to end, and really appreciate and imagining what it was like when these films first came out. Fun fact is that, these movies saved Universal not once, but twice. When Universal was foundering, they brought it back as a revival, these two films and King Kong, and it basically just kicked off the monster boom of the 50s. And that's when they sold the shock theater package to the television stations, and a whole new generation discovered the Universal monsters. So it's amazing that, horror ever gets a bad rap, because time and time again, it is shown that it is a huge hit with the public, and, it saves the studios time and again, but that just never quite gets its respect. And, Jack Pierce never getting an Oscar recognition, it's just, there's so many wrongs that, still need to be righted. And I feel like that's something that we get to do, every day that we celebrate the genre. Yeah, and we can't let one of our conversations go without me mentioning Friday the 13th. But you talk about Paramount Pictures was constantly embarrassed by all the Jason sequels. Yet they would bring in so much money. I mean, diminishing returns over time, but you also look at New Line Cinema. Yeah, they brought us Lord of the Rings, but it was also the house that Freddy built. So right. I'm there with you. Horror never needs to be legitimized, in my mind, because there's so much for as much. It's like any mainstream genre. For as much garbage there's also a lot of gems to talk about, and vice versa.
Okay.
So yeah, I think I'm glad that we're getting to experience this. I do want to mention that I felt cold watching Frankenstein, like literally cold. There's so much with the lighting, like when the tray goes up into the thunderstorm, and literally the only lighting is what's coming from above, and there's like these hints of light and the shafts and the lightning and everything. I just felt like I was in the middle of a drafty old windmill lab, which is a great contrast from the fancy, Castle Frankenstein that we saw in the Hammer movies. It's just it's so neat. But yeah, we're gonna come back next week, same bat time, same bat channel. No copyright. 7:30 p.m. Central on Friday. We are going to be doing Academia Giallo with our good friend John Kitley of Kitley's Crypt. Who'll be joining us on a number of these this month. But we're going to be talking about the Killer Reserve 9 seats, and you don't need a reservation to join us. Just maybe a reminder. So I'll put up that live stream invitation probably early next week. So if you can, please come back and join us for Scare-a-Thon. Keep up with AC at Horror 101 with Dr. AC. Support the Albany Park Theater Project. Donate as you will. And yeah, thanks so much. Thank you, AC, for joining us, for being part of this. As much as I'm hosting the live stream, it's inspirational to watch you do this for over a decade, continuing to support great causes and open up people to movies that they've never experienced. So thank you, man.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. I appreciate the shout out. I appreciate the support. And happy birthday, Dracula and Frankenstein.
Very much so. I would light a candle, but I know that would upset Frankenstein very much. But yeah, thanks everybody for watching. If you're catching this later, thank you for watching as well. Thanks for everyone who joined us live. Please like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Follow everything in the links below. And with that, I'm going to bid a good night to the children of the night. That's you lovely folks.